Welcome back to Notes from School, the podcast. I am your host, James B. Partridge, and today we're going to be going on a journey. We're going to leave the school hall in our minds, and we're going to take an unexpected journey to the Shire, to Middle-earth, because today we're moving slightly away from school hymns into an area of unknown, an area of fantasy, somewhere where you might have orcs and elves and hobbits, of course. We're going to be looking at a writer, well, a couple of writers. The first one is one that you will recognise. The second one, maybe not so much. So the first writer is, of course, J.R.R. Tolkien, one of the most iconic English authors and professor of the English language. You'll know him from The Hobbit, of course, The Lord of the Rings. Whether or not you've watched the films or you've read the books, I'm sure you'll know a lot about Tolkien. The second writer that we're going to talk about is a songwriter called Donald Swann. And you may have heard a song called Mud, Mud, Glorious Mud. Nothing quite like it for cooling the blood. So follow me, follow. That is the Hippopotamus song by Flanders and Swann. They were an extremely prolific songwriting duo throughout the 50s and 60s in England, and they did lots of kind of comedy music reviews, and there is a collaboration between Swann and Tolkien in a very fascinating book, which is a collection of songs set to the words by Tolkien, which were either written or collaborated with himself. So a lot of us, if you know the films of Lord of the Rings, you will think about the sound world of Lord of the Rings sounding a little bit like this. That is music by Howard Shore from The Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. The tune is entitled The Ring Goes South, and I'm sure you've probably heard that before. As I said, if you're not a fan of The Lord of the Rings, hopefully you still find this episode interesting. So you might be questioning. This is a podcast, Notes from a School. You might be thinking, why am I now talking about The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien? And the reason is not because of the Howard Shore soundtrack. It's because of these other songs that were written. So, this guy, Donald Swann, I will get a little bit more into his background and how this all came about in a second. But there's a really interesting link with the school assembly hymns. Because, well, first of all, a few episodes ago, I did a playthrough of a book called A Pusky Doo, which was a 1970s songbook that was sung all around the country. One of the songs in that was The Hippopotamus, which I just played for you. But when I got this book that's got all these Tolkien songs in it, the person that sold it to me had actually included a couple of clippings from Donald Swann's obituary in the 90s. And I was reading through it just out of interest to see if there's anything useful that I could use for the podcast. And I found an absolutely fascinating link to someone that you may have heard of in previous episodes called Sydney Carter. And Sydney Carter, if you don't recognize the name, wrote such classics as When I Needed a Neighbor, When I Needed a Neighbor, Were You There, Were You There, When I Needed a Neighbor, Were You There, and Dance then wherever you may be, I am the Lord of the dance, said he. And another one, which I think is quite an important link, called One More Step Along the World I Go, One More Step Along the World I Go. I talked about that in the very first Notes from School episode. One More Step was kind of written around the same time as this songbook. And Sydney Carter worked with Donald Swann on a lot of songs before he kind of got into his main songwriting, hymn writing. And they were collaborators throughout the 1950s and early 1960s. They performed all over the place. They wrote a lot of songs together. So it's a very interesting link. And I feel like this topic also works quite well off the back of 2 episodes about Jerusalem, the hymn, and I Vow to Thee, My Country, both of which are very iconic in the kind of the imagination of England and the imagination of the UK. I feel like when I was talking about I Vow to Thee, My Country, the music was written by Gustav Holst, and I feel like Holst's music, The Planets, you could really put The Planets soundtrack underneath the film of Lord of the Rings and it would probably make sense. So you can kind of imagine listening to this. Maybe seeing like the rolling hills of the Shire, or possibly even Rivendell with the Elves. And while I don't think they actually knew each other, Holst and Tolkien, but they were kind of living around that same time of the early 20th century, and a lot of this art and music came out of the ashes of the First World War. And there's actually quite an interesting, it's quite a good film called Tolkien, about his life. I think Nicholas Hoult and Lily Collins are in it. And I don't know whether it's totally true, but a lot of the ideas of the Lord of the Rings kind of came out of his experiences during the First World War. And Jerusalem was written as a direct kind of way to encourage patriotism in the First World War. So a lot of these tunes came out of that really kind of dark era. A lot of the kind of the art. But I feel like also with Holst and Tolkien, they were writing a lot of music, and I think the early 20th century, a lot of composers are writing music and writing art or literature or poetry about kind of diving into the mythology of England and being inspired by Old English. And Tolkien specifically was very inspired by Old English and stories like Beowulf. This links really nicely because I then heard about this book. So not about the Lord of the Rings soundtrack that a lot of us know. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to try and include some of the sheet music during the video because the actual pages are absolutely stunning. So I'm just going to hold up the book because with on the bottom and the top of each page is this beautiful elvish script that Tolkien wrote, the Tangwar script. And he personally illustrates this book, Tolkien. And yeah, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see I've got the book here, and in the front, whoever sold it to me included a load of kind of clippings and extra versions of the music. So I'm just going to put that to one side and get into it. But this has got one of those old book smells, which just reminds you of being in an old library. I don't know if anyone else quite likes the smell of old books. You know, I don't know what it is, kind of musty smell. So, what is this book, and where? How is it linked with Donald Swann and Tolkien, and where did it all come about? So I just want to talk about the origin of this book because I think it's really fascinating. So the first edition was published in 1967 with Tolkien's blessing, and musically it's kind of a mixture of English folk tunes, maybe classical song, like German songs. So it's called a song cycle, The Road Goes Ever On. And a song cycle in classical music is a collection of songs that are all sung back to back in a recital setting with a kind of a through theme, and they work as a collection, so they can be presented as a concert in itself. And that's what Donald Swann wanted to write when he put that together. So it's kind of a mixture of all of that and a bit of bonus Elvish in there. There's one song in the Elvish language which is Quenya, I believe it's pronounced, and the actual script itself is called Tengwa. Okay, so an interesting fact, by the way, if you are into Lord of the Rings, is that Tolkien actually developed this language before he wrote the books, which is kind of interesting. So he created the whole, I think in the 1920s and 30s, before he wrote The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, he created this whole world of language before he actually had the stories to go with it. So for him, the stories were made to provide a world for the languages and not the other way around. So that's a really fascinating way of doing it. And just on kind of a personal note, and one of the reasons why I wanted to do this episode as well about Tolkien is talking of languages. My dad was a languages teacher, and he actually read The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings in their entirety with all little extra voices. When I was growing up, to me and my older brother, we would be in bed, and before we went to sleep, he would read us Lord of the Rings, which is great. So it's part of my DNA. And as I said at the end of the last episode as well, I actually on my first date with my wife, we talked about Lord of the Rings, and she said, "Oh, are you a Lord of the Rings fan?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm a massive fan." And then it turns out that I was actually a pathetic fan compared to her and her family, because I had not watched the extended editions of the Lord of the Rings. I didn't have those ones, but now hopefully I'm back in favor now, because I'm really diving into some deep Tolkien lore in this book. So the book is called The Road Goes Ever On, and in my mind it's kind of got that link with One More Step Along the World I Go, talking about journeys and talking about traveling, and but this gets into more themes. I mean, we've got loss, we've got wonder, we've got longing, we've got all sorts of themes, and hope and memory, and I think all of those themes actually kind of link quite nicely with hymns. I mean, you could even call this a hymn book for hobbits, possibly. One of the songs actually had music that was dictated by Tolkien himself. I will talk about that as we go through the songs, but that's just kind of an overview of what this book is. So the composer, Donald Swann, he had a lot of success with Michael Flanders, who was the lyricist that he worked with, and they went all over the country, and they had a musical review that was very popular. And he was on holiday. He was obsessed with Lord of the Rings, like a lot of us are. And he had the hard copies, and he couldn't take them in his hand luggage when he was traveling, so he sent them in a container ship, I think. But his wife suggested that he write down some of the songs from The Lord of the Rings and set them to music, as he was writing a lot of songs at the time. And so he did that, and he went away and he set these songs to music. And so I wrote down a few clips of what he talks about, and he said, I was struck. So basically he selected a number of the different songs from here due to kind of their mood and their atmosphere, and he said, I was struck by their clarity and concision, and I began to feel their flavour as poems outside the narrative in which they appear. The longer ballads seemed self-sufficient, rugged, rumbustious and rollicking. They swept on like huge rivers, not for me to plunge into them, but the shorter ones looked as if they would enjoy musical accompaniment, and every creature in them was on the road. Bilbo, who sets the pace, Frodo and Sam journeying to the mountains of doom, Treebeard herding his trees. Everyone was moving, so I called the cycle The Road Goes Ever On, and this is also the title of the first song. And before we get into the songs, he then says, when he was writing it, when he was traveling, the first 6 songs came to be written on a beautiful Steinway grand piano in Ramallah, outside Jerusalem. The hills outside Jerusalem are extremely lovely, and if the caves around the Dead Sea are the place for old scrolls, they could also be the place for hobbits. Many of the caves are round, dry, and extensive. He also said that he wrote the Tom Bombadil song, which is in this collection, in the Midwest in the States, and he said that he composes the songs of Middle-earth in the Middle East and the Midwest, which is quite funny. Without further ado, let's get into some of these songs, because I'm sure you're dying to hear what they sound like. This is what Tolkien would have heard himself. He personally wrote the Elvish song, which I don't think I'm going to be able to sing because it is too hard to pronounce, and I could probably spend a bit of time learning how to pronounce the Elvish, but if you do want to learn a bit of Elvish, you can go on YouTube, and then there are kind of videos telling you how to pronounce the Elvish, but unfortunately I don't have enough time to do that. But this came about. Donald Swann, he as I said before, he wanted to set the poems of Tolkien to music. He contacted Tolkien's publishers, who put him in touch with Tolkien himself. They bonded. He was invited round to Tolkien's daughter's house for a tea party in Oxfordshire, and they got together, and Swann played him all these songs. But there was one song, the Elvish song, which Tolkien said, actually, I've got a better idea for how this goes, and he sang Donald Swann this incredible Gregorian chant style piece of music, and he said, this is what I feel like fits the elves, and this is what I think would have been sung in Rivendell. But let's start from the top. So this whole song cycle, as I said, it is sung all the way through. I will stop after each one, I hope you enjoy the songs. You are now about to hear what Tolkien himself would have heard played to him back in 1967. This first tune is called The Road Goes Ever On, and it's a classic meditation by a 130-year-old hobbit, as you do. I hope you're still listening to this, even if you're not a fan of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. Bilbo Baggins in The Hobbit, he sings this song when he leaves the Shire for Rivendell, but then it's sung again by both Bilbo and Frodo in Lord of the Rings. So in the second time, it's spoken aloud by Frodo as him and his companions pause on their way to Crick Hollow, and they're looking beyond to lands that some of them have never seen before. They're about to leave the Shire, and in order to kind of calm themselves, they think about Bilbo's old song, you hear it again in the Fellowship of the Ring, spoken by Bilbo in Rivendell after the hobbits have returned from their journey, and they've got to Rivendell, and Bilbo's an old sleepy hobbit. He murmurs the verse and falls asleep. In the actual films themselves, Gandalf does sing a little bit of this, but it's not the same tune. He sings, "The road goes ever on and on," something like that. But now, this is "The Road Goes Ever On" by Donald Swann with words by Tolkien. The road goes ever on and on, down from the door where it began. Now far ahead the road has gone, and I must follow if I can, pursuing it with weary feet until it joins some larger way, where many paths and errands meet, and whither then the road goes ever on and on, and whither then I cannot say. So that's the end of that one, and it goes straight into the next tune, but I'll just give you a little bit of context about what the next song is. So that first one goes into a tune called "Upon the Hearth, the Fire is Red." So the context in Lord of the Rings, Frodo, Pippin and Sam, they sing this as a walking song as they hike through the woody end. So a little excerpt from the Fellowship of the Ring, first book, chapter 3. They began to hum softly, as hobbits have a way of doing as they walk along, especially when they are drawing near to home at night. With most hobbits, it is a supper song or a bed song, but these hobbits hummed a walking song, though not, of course, without any mention of supper and bed. Okay, so this is a very kind of folky tune. It's got a bit of a lilting melody. It's quite quick as well. So I'm going to sing it in kind of like a hobbit accent, possibly. So I hope you enjoy. This is "Upon the Hearth, the Fire is Red," talking about the homesickness and the ideal of the Shire as a sanctuary. Here we go. It goes like this. Upon the hearth the fire is red, beneath the roof there is a bed, but not at weary are our feet, still round the corner we may meet a sudden tree or standing stone that none have seen but we alone. Tree and flower and leaf and grass, let them pass, hill and water under sky, pass them by, pass them by. Still round the corner there may wait a new road or a secret gate, and though we pass them by today, tomorrow we may come this way and take the hidden paths that run towards the moon or to the sun. Apple, thorn and nut and slow, let them go, let them go. Sand and stone and pool and dell, fare ye well, fare ye well. Home is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, the shadows to the edge of night until the stars are all ahead. behind and home ahead. We'll wander back to home and bed. Page turn. Mist and twilight, cloud and shade, away shall fade, away shall fade. Fire and lamp and meat and bread, and then to bed, then to bed. There we go. Upon the hearth, the fire is red, the hobbits are walking through. It's then time to meet a new character. This character is called Treebeard. He's got a very deep and resonant voice, so I'll see what I can do. I've got probably slightly more of a baritone tenor range, but I'll see if I can add some bassy tones to Treebeard. Okay, so if you don't know Treebeard, he's a tree, as you could probably tell. A talking tree, a living tree, and this is the song where he meets Merry and Pippin, who are two of the hobbits that are friends with Frodo and Sam. And Treebeard is talking about the memory of the lands he's seen in the passage of countless years. When they first did this song cycle, the bass soloist introduced it with the line, think of one of those road signs that says, caution, heavy plant crossing. So Treebeard is on his journey, and he talks about a few places called Tasarinan, which is a valley, and that's where he comes from, I think. And he's one of the oldest living beings in Middle-earth. So for him, this whole song is a lament for the loss of the ancient forests. And of course, much like William Blake was writing about the dark satanic mills that were popping up in his poem Jerusalem, Tolkien was writing about industrialization in a way, and the loss of ancient forests, the loss of ancient forests and myths and all the magic that kind of comes with ancient woodlands. And so Treebeard, his character, he sings this as he's striding through Fangorn Forest, taking Merry and Pippin to Welling Hall, which is his home at the foot of the mountain. Okay, so he's telling the story, and so let's get into it. Hope you enjoyed. This song is called In the Willow-meads of Tasarinan. So imagine Treebeard is walking through the valleys and the woods. Okay, I'm just going to play you a little bit of this one because it is quite long. This is In the Willow-meads of Tasarinan, so you get an idea of Treebeard's song. Okay. In the willow-meads of Tasarinan, I walked in the spring. He's got that kind of deep, resonant voice. Oh, the sight and the smell of the spring in Tasarinan, and I said, that was good. Yes, little taster of the Treebeard song. If you want to listen to the whole thing, I'll put it up as a separate video on YouTube. And as I said before, if you want to watch any of these episodes, you can watch them back on YouTube. And what I'll try and do, as I said, is put the sheet music on there because we've got this beautiful Elvish text in here. So we move on to the next song, and this one is sung by Sam Gamgee, Frodo's best friend, and he's singing this as he watches over Frodo in Mordor, and it's a moment of near despair. So they're in this place called the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and if you recall the films, Frodo, he's been paralyzed by the spider Shelob, and he's been captured by two orcs with the best names in the whole of Lord of the Rings, which is Shagrat and Gorbag, two of the best Lord of the Rings characters. And Frodo, he's kind of all wrapped up, and the orcs are gonna steal all his stuff. Sam climbs to the top of the stairs in the tower, but he can't find Frodo. And he's trying to get up, and in order to kind of lift up his spirits, he recites an old poem that he remembers from his days in the Shire that Bilbo taught him. In western lands beneath the sun, the flowers may rise in spring. Okay, and I'm going to sing you this song that Sam sings. This is In Western Lands. Okay. In western lands beneath the sun, the flowers may rise in spring. The trees may bud, the waters run, the merry finches sing. Or there may be 'tis cloudless night and swaying beaches bare. The elven stars as true at journey's end I lie in darkness buried deep, beyond all towers strong and high, beyond all mountains steep. Above all shadows rise the sun, and stars forever dwell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. I will not say the day is done, nor bid the stars farewell. Good old Sam Gamgee. The next song is the Elvish song that I mentioned earlier. This is the one that Tolkien himself dictated to Donald Swann. And it kind of starts off. I can't pronounce the Elvish particularly well, but it's like this. Namárië Tasarinan, that kind of thing. It's obviously it's very clearly inspired by Gregorian chant and kind of reflecting Tolkien's Catholic upbringing, I'm sure. So this is what Swann himself says. The professor approved 5, but hesitated over my music for Namárië, Galadriel's farewell in Lothlórien. He had heard it differently in his mind, he said, and hummed a Gregorian chant. I made a note of it, and in the following week I played it over many times to the Elvish words. There was no doubt that his monodic line from the early church music tradition expressed the words ideally, not only the sadness of the word Namárië and the interjection I, but equally the ritual mood of the elves. For my song cycle, it would make a variation for the piano to stop and then return for the next song, so I only added the introductory line, interlude and coda. Number 5 is thus Words and Theme by Professor Tolkien. So I just played you a little snippet of that. And we are going to move on to the next song now. I Sit Beside the Fire. Bilbo is in Rivendell reflecting on his long life, the adventures he's had, the friends he's lost, and he sings it the evening before the Fellowship of the Ring set out upon their quest. And he sings this in the presence of Frodo when he has given him the mithril coat and Sting, the sword. So I'm going to sing it to you now. This is I Sit Beside the Fire. I sit beside the fire and think of all that I have seen, of meadow flowers and butterflies in summers that have been, of yellow leaves and gossamer in autumns that there were, with morning mist and silver sun and wind upon my hair. I sit beside the fire and think of people long ago, and people who will see a world that I shall never know. But all the while I sit and think of times that were before. I listen for returning feet and voices at the door. El Beref Gilthone El Silifren Panamiriel Omen El Galer Elenath Tekete Palendiriel. Getting into the Elvish, and then it gets back into that tune again. I listen for returning feet and voices at the door. Okay, So the final song this goes into is called Errantry. And this is the setting of words by Bilbo. And it's actually not from the Lord of the Rings books. This is from Tom Bombadil. And the words are an amazing poem. I'm not going to play this one because it's, first of all, extremely hard to play on the piano and also very hard to sing. But just a selection of some of the words. There was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola to wander in and had in her a load of yellow oranges and porridge for his provender. He perfumed her with marjoram and cardamom and lavender. And then it goes on. He battled with the Dumbledores, the Hummerhorns, and honeybees, and won the golden honeycomb, and running home on sunny seas and ship of leaves and gossamer with blossom for a canopy. He sat and sang and furbished up and burnished up his panoply. And interesting that he kind of brings back this very ancient word, which is Dumbledore, which is an Old English dialect for bumblebees. And you know what happened to Dumbledore. So we're not talking about Harry Potter in this episode, but this is called Errantry. As I said, it's very hard to play. The tune goes, there was a merry passenger, a messenger, a mariner. He built a gilded gondola. It's very, very fast. But we're going to get onto the final song from this selection. And this is a really, really beautiful song called Bilbo's Last Song. And it's the last song of the episode. And it's the song that was actually added to this book after the first edition because Tolkien died. And at his funeral, Donald Swann saw Tolkien's old secretary called Joy Hill, and Tolkien had left her a poem called Bilbo's Last Song as a farewell gift to her. She'd found it on his desk, and he said, you can keep it, it's yours. And so she showed it to Swann, and he thought it'd be a great way to finish the song cycle as a way to kind of commemorate Tolkien. And he was very moved by this idea of this song. It's talking about Bilbo leaving and moving into the West with the Elves, passing away. And the idea of kind of the ship moving under the starlit sky into the West, and it kind of made him think about Tolkien and Tolkien's kind of Viking link as well. So even though Tolkien was English, he felt like he had a lot of links kind of with Denmark. He learnt Danish fluently, and he felt like he had a bit of a Danish and Viking past. And he did a huge amount of research on Iron Age lore and Viking lore, and the words in this song are full of sea metaphors as well. And Donald Swann actually sang it at the funeral of his longtime collaborator, Michael Flanders, who loved the sea apparently. And the poem finishes with Bilbo's story with lines that would appeal both to the British and the Viking sensibilities, which are lands there are to west of west, where night is quiet and sleep is rest. So this is the final song of the episode. This is Bilbo's Last Song. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, by the way. I know that it is something a little bit different to what I've normally been doing, but if you are a fan of Tolkien and if you are a fan of Lord of the Rings, I hope you really enjoyed it. We're going to sing one final song before we finish. This is Donald Swann's setting of Tolkien's poems, Bilbo's Last Song. Bilbo sings this as he boards the ship to the undying lands. Day is ended in my eyes, but journey long before me lies. Farewell, friends, I hear the call. The ships beside the stormy wall. Fog is white and waves are grey. Beyond the sunset leads my way. Foam is salt, the wind is free. I hear the rising of the sea. Farewell, friends, the sails are set, the wind is eased, the moorings fret. Shadows long before me lie beneath the ever-bending sky. But islands lie beneath the sun, that I shall raise ere all is done. Lands there are to west of west, where night is quiet and sleep is rest. Guided by the lonely star, beyond the utmost harbour bar, I'll find the havens fair and free, and beaches of the starlit sea. Ship by ship I seek the west, and fields and mountains ever blessed. Farewell to Middle-earth at last, I see the star above your mast. Farewell to Middle-earth at last, I see the star above your mast. That is the final song of the song cycle. The road goes ever on. Tolkien and Donald Swann. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Feel free to share it if you have, and please leave a review or any comments or any extra bits that I've left out. I'd love to know if you have any memories of this book at all, or if you have any information that I would find interesting, or if you want to correct any points that I've made, or if you just have a love of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit as well, let me know. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. I've been James Partridge, and this has been another episode of Notes from School, the podcast. Hopefully see you again next Wednesday. Class.